What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Let's Talk About It podcast, where we turn conversation into application. And today, my very special guest, I had to do this one. It was only right. You may have seen him at the soundboard. You may have seen him downtown at Burt's, or more importantly, you may have seen him on Facebook Live Monday through Friday. I got none other than my pops, my dad in the building, Leon Jones Sr. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well, sir. Honored, as I was saying off air, to be on this podcast. And I've watched you over the years, and I watched this morph into a reality. I would hear you talk about it, attending various seminars so you can polish your craft. And it has materialized. You have spoken into existence. So I'm happy to be here today.
Okay. All right. I see you got your shades on. I didn't know whether we was doing the podcast or you was putting out a new single. What we got on today?
That's my brand. Maze got the hat.
Right. Okay.
Michael Jackson had the flooded pants, the sock, and the glove. And Prince had, in his latter years, he had the emblem on his face, and on his guitar. So most entertainers or people who in the business have a brand.
All right. Okay. I support it. Yes, you're looking good, sir. Got the shades on, the hat, the shoes. I see you.
I'm like Ray Charles. I let it do what it do.
You can't have step?
No.
All right. Again, Pop, I'm glad to have you on the podcast, man. It was only right that I brought you on. So my first question I want to start with before we get into the topic for today is, if somebody asks who Leon was, what would you tell them?
Well, I simply say Leon is a gentleman who's ambitious in terms of what he's been put on this earth to do. He realizes mortality, so that affords him to depend on a power outside of himself, and I reference that as being God himself. So Leon is someone who trusts God, who believes in God, and who understands that he's a spiritual being first, and then all the other stuff comes along with it. So,
for sure.
But that took me some time to get there. It's called maturation.
Okay. And so, just for the people watching, what is your background? How did you grow up? What was that like growing up?
I grew up in a house filled with music, from my mom to my dad to my grandmother. And as I dig into my ancestry, there were people who loved music, played music, and I always aspired to be a musician. Had a brother who's no longer here now, but he and I mimicked the Beatles.
Okay.
When we were little, we would even make guitars. So music is in my DNA, and sometimes we try to run from what we're placed on this earth to do. And I often hear you say that, we could be doing some things, but is that the plan that God has? And so I had to resolve in myself that music is what I do, my mission, but I can take that and use that platform to glorify God. And I tried to kind of get away from that at some point, but it's in my DNA. So but I grew up, had a decent childhood, made some friends, we had fun, and we did music all the while I was in my teens on up until, my adult years. So music has been a part of my life.
Okay. Yeah. And you kind of, segued into the topic, which is, are you surviving or are you surrendering? So my question for you now is, what is, in your eyes, the difference between survival and surrendering?
Well, survival, I looked it up, and there's several definitions, but the one that stuck with me is the one that says attempting to outlive someone or something.
Okay.
Survival. That, and some people are in survival mode for various reasons. But to me, the difference between survival and surrendering is you can either be forced to surrender. It talks about surrendering as a prisoner.
Right.
Or you can voluntarily surrender your will to a higher power, in this case, to God.
Right.
We don't want to fight God or rebel, I can use that term, against God. So it all depends on the context. But the difference is surrendering is you do it willfully. And then there are cases where you're forced to surrender because you have no other choice. You've been captured and now you are a prisoner of war.
Right.
And survival is you're trying to make it. Whatever the cost is, you just, you're in survival mode. You're in war, bullets flying everywhere, so you're doing everything you could do to survive. Right.
And so the reason why I asked that question is because when you brought up context, when I say surrender, I'm not saying like, oh, we watching a superhero movie and the good guy catches the bad guy and, oh, I got to surrender now. I'm talking more of a spiritual surrender, as you kind of hinted. Right. Like, do we survive or do we surrender? Because a lot of times what even me and you off camera have talked about from friends or, even situations in our own lives, like for the most part, people have just been surviving. And I think people just survive just based off what they know. Like, all I know is survival. All I know is, hey, I got to do this in order to get this. Like you said, you hearing bullets flying or whatever the case may be. So I got to do whatever it is to survive, even if in the public eye or to my friends and family, it's deemed as wrong. You shouldn't have did that. That's unlawful. But this is what I know. This is all I'm doing to survive. So from even growing up and seeing, has there been a time where you survive more than you surrendered?
Yes, and you painted the picture because you're in this case surviving because you don't want to seem like the oddball. So you do things that is not who you really are, and you cave into the peer pressure.
Right.
All of us face that at some time or another. However, in the context that we're referencing here today, yes, I believe most people who espouse to religion or something spiritual, they survive. They're just trying to, as we said, in the context of outliving this person, because this is what's been passed on to them, as opposed to understanding, surrendering, or submitting to someone who has a plan, as you often say, and that plan always supersedes ours. But if we don't understand that, then we brush that off, or we look at surrendering / submitting as something negative because of how the world present surrendering as being weak.
Right.
But oftentimes I've said that humility is just power under control.
Right.
I have the power to obliterate you or annihilate you, but I choose not to go into that mode. Not that I'm afraid, but that I just have too much to lose. So
right.
I walk away, and when you understand who you are, as our great teacher and Savior taught us, he understood who he was, so he didn't even have to respond to certain situations or questions.
Exactly. Right. And I think the biggest thing when I look at both of these two, surrendering and surviving, as I said before, we got a lot of people that are surviving because, again, you can't model, like what we say all the time, you can't model what you don't see, but you've seen survival your whole life.
Right.
So has there been a point, and, where you were in a situation, and what was that situation where you felt like I'm surviving instead of surrendering? In this case, again, it's a spiritual,
Right.
Surrender or submission. Like, I'm doing more surviving than surrendering to God and the plan that he has for my life, or just surrendering to what could be a hindrance to me. When have you felt like that?
I felt like that, and shortly after, your mom, in this case, my wife, passed,
Mm-hmm.
that I was just really surviving.
Mm-hmm.
So you just do certain things to get by.
Right.
Until, those persons who really love me said, look, we understand you love your wife, but life goes on.
Right.
And it was hard for me to fathom that at that point because of where I was, and realize that this too will pass.
Yeah.
And as time went on and I was able to come to grips with it, I was able to do more than survive, and I was able to surrender. Okay, Lord, this has happened. It only caught me off guard. It didn't catch you by surprise, because you know everything. So what am I to do? What am I to do from this point? And when you get in a posture like that, that's, to me, surrendering or submitting to what's going on. Because, there's a text in the Bible says all things work together for good. It didn't say all things were good. It says all things work together for good to them that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. So I believe that I love the Lord. And what do you mean by that? In spite of what happened, I'm not trying to go back to my old lifestyle, but I'm going to weather the storm.
Yeah.
And understand that God knows better than I know.
And I think a lot of times, because we don't all come from the same world, like, right. I could never tell somebody what it's like. I could never entertain a conversation of being fatherless because I've never experienced that. Now I can tell you what it's like to lose a loved one, because I've lost countless of loved ones. Right. But sometimes I think we end up getting into arguments or, disagreements with people because my world is not your world. And I think the biggest thing for me on this topic is, just kind of understanding the two of survival and surrendering, because, like, there are times where sometimes all you have is survival, but I don't believe that needs to be the default option. Like, I don't need to always be in survival mode. No. Like, and so what can always being in, because again, like, there's nothing wrong with survival. Sometimes all a person may have is survival. And when can you realize or understand, why is it so important to not be in survival mode for the rest of your life?
Because, one, you're not trying to, or you shouldn't be, I rephrase that, you should not be trying to outlive someone else or something in the context of what we're talking about now. In other words, what do you mean? We try to compare ourselves with each other, which is dangerous.
Right.
Because when we really sit down and think about it, there's nobody else on the face of the earth like you. Even though you're my son, you have DNA. There's nobody on the face of the earth like Chris.
Right.
You have your uniqueness, and so do I. And I think in the plan that God has for humanity, I think that's the thing that he wants us to discover.
Right.
That you are unique. I've brought you into a plan that only you can fulfill, and it's going to not only benefit you, but it's going to benefit the entire world, because the entire world is going to see me through your eyes.
Right.
And so once one understands that, and that's where we talk about the proper home training, and if that's not there, then we're grasping and trying to be like someone else,
right?
That we could never be like. We probably can mimic them,
right?
But we would never be them. You see, and so I tell people all the time, the biggest person you could be is be you.
Yeah.
We, as much as I love David Ruffin and whomever else came before me, whenever I sing a song that he's leading,
right,
only thing they're gonna do is compare me to him.
Right.
They're gonna say, well, you sound like him, you might be close to him,
right,
but you ain't David.
Right.
And so, and then all I'm doing is giving him more credibility. And there's nothing wrong with that. However, I don't need to be in survival mode. I need to realize who I am and surrender or submit to that which God has for me. And that's only I can fulfill, because no one can take it,
right,
unless I give it to him. And you give it to him by giving up and constantly staying in survival mode, meaning you don't want to accept who you are, the good and the bad about you, and then come to grips with it and realize that God understands all of your flaws.
Yeah.
And let him handle that.
Yeah. And my next question is, since we went over how you were surviving, when was there a time, or when did you realize I finally surrendered to God? I finally have given up all this stuff that has had me bound, or I've surrendered myself. Because again, like you said, a lot of times when you hear submission, or it makes it seem like, oh, I'm just a slave, or I just got to do whatever you say, or I got to be humble. Like I heard somebody say the other day, don't ask me to be humble. And he put up I think it was the Merriam-Webster's dictionary definition of it. And it basically was describing like weakness. But again, you always say context. So understanding all that, when was the time or the real moment that you realize I've given up all these things that are really blocking me from my purpose and me being better as a man, a human being, a man of God, all of that? When was that moment that you said, I know I finally surrendered to God?
Well, to use the term finally, I think it's a maturation period. Because we don't just surrender. Let's just use surrender in the context of war. You're going to fight until you can't fight no more, right?
Right.
So we do the same thing with God. But God doesn't come from heaven, or has not come from his throne or paradise, however you want to describe it, for you and I to lose. But because of how God has been presented over the years, we try to humanize God, that is dangerous in and of itself.
Right.
God only wants the best for us. So it's only when one, has this encounter with God, like characters in the Bible. Moses says, show me your glory. That means I done heard all this other stuff, but I want to see you for myself.
Yeah.
Paul, who was one of the greatest teachers and sat before one of the greatest educators in the world, was knocked out. He was religious, but he was misguided.
Right.
You see, to the point where he was religious, but he was doing ungodly things, breathing out, threatening, snatching people out of the church, until something happened.
Right.
What was that? His road to Damascus. What was my road to Damascus? As I mentioned earlier, the passing of my wife, your mom. It was then, because mind you, God give you little hints along life's journey.
Right.
And as I've said to you, Dietrich Hatton's mother, Prophetess Hatton, Joyce Hatton, called me into a radio station like this. Look, God has something greater than what you're doing. I understand you love music, but he's not going to take music from you because that's his calling card with you. But there's greater stuff. And I laughed. Then someone else said basically the same thing, but just in a different context. And I blew them off. God says, Leon, am I going to have to come from heaven for you to get it? And so God doesn't shut us down or have an encounter with us to discourage us. He has this encounter or wants this encounter so we can realize our greatness in him.
Right.
So to your question, I'm just coming to realize that because I was singing with a group basically all my life, and I couldn't see myself as a solo artist.
Right.
Because I had other people to lean on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now all I have is God to lean on, and that's a majority.
Right.
And so I'm seeing doors open that God could have opened, I guess, whenever he so choose.
Mm-hmm.
But it was only to your point, to your question, when I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do.
Right.
So I started working toward that end, writing songs for me, going out to different venues and running into people that I hadn't seen in years. It's like, man, we could do A, B, and C. And so now you can see that God is putting this thing together. Like I told you about the event I'm on with the Blue Notes coming up. This is God is saying, Leon, I'm providing a platform not just for you, but so you can continue to express my love to people who would never come into church.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, people who are just surviving in the church, they'll frown on me. Why are you doing that? Why are you in that? Well, my calling is bigger than the church.
All right.
The four walls, that is.
All right.
I'm commissioned to go. Go where? Where the people are. That's what Jesus did. And because people, this is what get me. You can work, you can have a job and work for a person who's a non-Christian.
Right.
You will say, well, why are you singing at that place? And what's the difference?
Right.
Wherever I go, I have a responsibility to God to do what? Represent him.
Right.
So
facts.
That's that's when to your question, that it's just here recently that I've really come to grips with. It's okay, Leon. And it's never too late.
Yeah.
No.
And I love what you said earlier, like it's a maturity thing of surrender. And I think sometimes, even me, honestly, like we, in our relationship with God, like I said, on a more spiritual note in the context of like surrendering, we think like, oh, once I get baptized, once I do this, once I know so many books and stories in the Bible, that's surrendering. And all of that is good. You want to know all of that. But like you say, it's an ongoing journey because you're not just going to surrender in the month of November and then you just going to follow everything that God do. Like you said, you have hiccups and things that happen along the way where we don't always do exactly what God asks us to do. But I love that part about what you said, like maturing and understanding this is not a sprint. This is a marathon with your relationship with God and surrendering to him. It's what we always say, the Bible says, die to self daily. Right. So I think a lot of times we feel like it's too late because all I know is survival. And, you hear God is coming again, or, you have different things that we do in life that make us believe like I can never come back from this. But as you said, if you continue to surrender and understand that there's a higher power, in this case, God, and he doesn't look at you or me like how I would look at a person or how you would look at a person like, oh, you may not be able to come back from that with me. I may be done with you. Right. But God is saying like, continue to walk the path. You're going to fall. You're going to trip up. Hey, you may be the one to knock yourself down. Right. But if you continue to say, less of me and more of you, then you'll be in the right place of surrendering territory.
And that's what surrender really means. I wrote the definition down, and it means there were several, but this one jumped out at me, to give oneself over to another authority. Mm-hmm. In this case, we're giving ourselves over to God.
Right.
And even though that sounds trite, trivial, but we struggle with that because the Apostle Paul would write that the flesh is enmity with God. And one you like for me to quote all the time, 1 Corinthians 3:3, you are yet carnal.
Right.
See? The Apostle Paul says you are yet carnal, meaning we're yet in our flesh. See, we're religious doing ungodly things. That's misguided. It don't mean you're a bad person. That just means you've been given wrong information about who God is.
Out of pocket.
Oh, no question.
So my last question, and then we're going to get into our game.
Yeah.
It says, what would your surrendered self say to your survival self? Getting deep. We getting deep.
Why did it take so long?
Why did it take so long?
That's
I like that.
Yeah, why did it take so long?
And why would you say that as far as why did it take so long?
Well, I mean, we're mortal. So, we get, you hear women in America, that is, when they're 35, if they're not married, they panic and they end up with somebody they regret. And you hear men, well, I don't have no children, blah, 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 blah. I want to be married and I want to have sex before Christ come again. All that's good. However, God is not bound by time.
Right.
And so we panic. And that's real talk.
Right.
We don't say it and we cloak it with these religious cliches, but yet we're miserable. I'm saying, well, I've come to resolve that God does not lie. And what he promised, and we see it all through the Bible with Samson, he said, you're going to be the deliverer. Samson did whatever he wanted to do.
Right.
And he ended up being the deliverer. Now, I'm not advocating that you do what you want to do. No, I'm not saying. What I'm saying is, if God has made you a promise, he's going to keep it.
Right.
You delay it, not God.
All right.
And so when you finally come to, look, God knows best. Guess what? God is waiting there and saying what I just said about to survival. What took you so long?
All right.
And he don't say, I told you so. Wait till I get back to you. He go on and carry out his promise that he made to you. And that's called LOVE.
Yeah. Yes, sir. I like that one. All right. Are you ready for this game, sir?
Yes, sir.
All right. It's called This or That. So I made these questions especially for you. So here we go.
Right. We shall see.
The first one, we're going to start off light. Then we're going to progress as time go on. Cold or hot weather, and why?
Hot weather, is studies have shown, they did research, people who live in climates that stay relatively warm, they're a little more laid back, their attitudes is a little more easier as opposed to people on the East Coast. The weather changes, they got this grim, they hard. So I prefer, I'm a laid back type guy. People may not know that if they never get to know Leon, but I'm a laid back type guy, and I got a California
type of swag to you.
Type of swag.
Because normally the people, they know the shades, they know the suit.
Yeah.
Wintertime come the trench coat, flashy suits to the nine.
Well, not flashy, just the suits may be to the nine, but they're conservative. Let's be clear. I don't want to. If you see me in a loud suit, I'm on stage. That's the only time. But other than that, I got my charcoal gray, navies, black, or brown.
And all coordinated from head to toe.
No question.
He can't be out of pocket.
No, because you ain't just representing you.
Right.
You represent God.
Okay. I like that one.
And ain't nothing, out of place with him.
All right.
You do know that, don't you?
Right. We're going to go music. One of your favorite things. Here we go. Marvin Gaye or Stevie Wonder, and why?
Oh man, that's a hard one. Stevie gonna be mad at me. I got to go with Marvin Gaye. We got kindred spirits. Marvin did a piece. I think that was his best work. And I believe, beyond a shadow of a doubt, something bigger than him was a part of it. What's going on, which that question has not been answered even to today. And if you just kind of listen to Marvin, you heard his pain, you heard him crying out, you heard him talking about Revelation, when he used the line, children of the day, which was then, they will suffer tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we see that young kids suffering, the 80 babies, they grown, they were crack babies.
Right.
They out of their mind.
Out of their mind.
Yeah. I mean, anything goes now. And Marvin, he could not have been able to, as Paul McCartney would go on to say, he's not a songwriter. He transmit what he hears. And so Marvin Gaye was a spiritual man who was, as time went on, became misguided. Hence, he was just surviving. And he turned to drugs. He was just, and the people who were not controlling, but was in charge of him, they would just prop him up because he was he was a cash cow. But to you, I prefer Marvin over Stevie. Although Stevie,
Songs in the Key of Life,
that was his best work. But Marvin's What's Going On trumps that. And I think Stevie was inspired by Marvin, from the What's Going On album, because it's relatively the same, content.
Okay, all right. Now this is really for you now, since you and your buddies like to say orator. So, who would you rather go hear speak? I feel like I know who you're gonna say, but I'm gonna ask you anyway. Malcolm X or Martin Luther King?
Malcolm.
I should have.
I would tell you why. And this is not a knock on Dr. King, but these are his words, not mine. He led his people into a burning house. Let's unpack that. He was under the guise that he was leading people right, i.e. integration.
Right.
But if we go back in history and look, every ethnic group has been segregated and have done well in the segregation within their own, and then whatever they needed, if they were allowed by law to go wherever they so choose.
Right.
But segregation, if you go back in the annals of time, has worked. So I think people understood what Dr. King was trying to do, but he said, these are his words, I led my people into a burning house. And so, and people, when I say the greater society could embrace Martin, because he wasn't doing anything to pierce them. He was throwing the Constitution back in their lap, but they could turn their head as we saw throughout the civil rights movement, sick and dogs. They didn't care nothing about their own civil rights. Malcolm, on the other hand, he was like someone with a spear piercing white America in the side, and it made them feel uncomfortable. But he was telling the truth. I have a right to protect my family. And so they spin it and say, well, Malcolm is pushing violence. No. Malcolm is saying, if someone comes to my home unannounced,
I can tap that head.
Right. According to your Constitution. Right? And so, and I think at the end, even though Martin, for political reasons, distanced himself from Malcolm X,
right,
because of how it would appear, and he couldn't make his donors mad. And I'll just leave it there. Malcolm said, trace the money and you'll understand the narrative. See who's funding. And that's true. And whoever, that's a true statement. The golden rule is this: he who has the gold rules. That's the golden rule.
My next question. Who is the best male group in your eyes? Who is the best male group?
I think I may take the fifth for fear of incriminating myself. Because you my son, you my man. I won't get into that. But I think people that know me know, and I think the world knows.
Now me, I always say, I'd have had this conversation with you before.
Man.
I'm going to say New Edition because let's break this down here. You got Bobby Brown, who had some good albums.
Ultimate entertainer.
Bobby Brown had the Getaway album. Before that, he had My Prerogative. Then Ralph Tresvant, he had a decent album. Johnny Gill, good album. BBD had a good album. Now, we look at the Dramatics, your guys. None of them, respectfully, none of them.
LJ had a solo album. Ron had a solo
But
album.
when we look at their albums and you compare it to a Bobby Brown or a Johnny Gill, do they stand a chance?
If we do it that way, I'm gonna agree with you. But you asked me who was the best group.
Right, the best male group.
Right.
But that's all in
The Temptations.
Okay. Well, I can go for that one. Okay.
Yeah, the best male group to ever to don a stage in the world.
Okay.
Is David Ruffin.
All right.
Eddie Kendrick. Paul Williams. Melvin Franklin. And the last man standing, Mr. Otis Williams.
Mr. Otis
Big
Williams.
O.
So now
group. Now we get into solo. I agree with you, but the best male group ever is the Temptation.
Temptation. All right. So
all 6 feet.
So you got some albums with your group, The Resurrection, for those who don't know. What would you say is your best album? To me, I can tell you what the best album was.
Because we had a super lineup.
Okay.
I call it honor the late great Mr. Rance Allen.
Mm-hmm.
We played and he came backstage. He says, "Man, I hope y'all are not offended, but I'm branding you all as the Temptations of Gospel."
Mm.
And so we, and the lineup consisted of Michael Brock, Robert Evans, Mark Walker, and myself. And that was a tough lineup there. We did some great things. Our music is timeless. It's classic. I was listening to some of it the other day. Matter of fact, where I was before I come in, the lady's like, "Aren't you a part of the Resurrection?" She says, "It's a song y'all was singing," and she's. So I let her listen to some of the stuff. She says, "No, that's not it." But our first record was the best one. We had great production, musicians, engineers. In every project we did, we had excellence. By none.
Okay.
You've seen the bands. We won't get into the bands. James Brown taught us the bands have to be tight.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is the last one. What is the best like movie biopic that you've seen on music? Right, we got the 5 Heartbeats, we got the Temptation, the New Edition story, different movies. What is the best one you've seen?
You may be saying, "Oh, Pop, I think you should." I think the best one I've seen is on Frankie Lyman.
Frankie Lyman, Why Do Fools Fall in Love?
I didn't know. Although I heard his music, I didn't know he was as good as he was. The guy was an entertainer.
Mm-hmm.
The Michael Jacksons of the world, they copied from this guy. He was smooth in his vocal arrangements, man. The cat was good.
Okay. I would go Temptations. It's funny, I just saw a guy a few days ago posting about he was writing the lyrics to I Want to Love I Can See. I definitely feel like if I wouldn't go Temptations, I would definitely go the New Edition story. Yeah. Besides the fact that I'm a big New Edition fan, but it was just a really dope story. But thank you, Pop. I appreciate you for coming through, blessing us with your presence, with the swag.
I'm honored to be on the podcast, and all jokes aside, I'm proud of you and your brother. Y'all have made me proud by pursuing the things you said you would do, when you were small kids. And I was like, get over in there and write what you're going to be, put it on your wall.
Right.
And both of y'all are doing that. And, your mom will be definitely proud.
Thank you, sir.
What you guys have accomplished.
Thank you. Thank you guys again for tuning in to the Let's Talk About It podcast. We'll see you same time, same place. That's a wrap.